Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. So today's video is going to be about Brazil, which is honestly one of my favorite countries I've been to so far, if not my favorite. I've been to Brazil twice, so this video might be a little messy because I want to include tips and videos from both times that I went. I've been to 5 states out of the 27 states of Brazil. Brazil is a huge country, and I think one of the reasons it's one of my favorite countries, besides the amazing people, food, and cultural diversity, is also the ethnic diversity and the ancestral diversity in Brazil. Because Brazil was colonized by Portugal, many people are of European descent. Because of the history of slavery, many people are of African descent. Many people have Latin American ancestry and indigenous ancestry. Also, I'm sorry for the noise. There's currently a lot of construction work going on outside the window that I am recording this in, so it might be a little bit loud, and I'm sorry if that's distracting. So like I said, Brazil is a huge country and very diverse ethnically and culturally. It's huge, and several of the states that I've been to are huge. For instance, Minas Gerais is roughly 8 times the size of my country, Ireland. However, I visited Amazonas, Minas Gerais, and Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and I also crossed into Brazil from the Bolivian border through Mato Grosso do Sul. Like I mentioned, Brazil has so much cultural and ethnic diversity, so what I'm going to tell you about Brazil is not going to cover all of the culture in Brazil. The second time that I actually went by land. I went through the Bolivian border. So I got a bus from Santa Cruz de la Sierra to Porto Soares. It's like a small town or village that's very close to the Bolivian-Brazilian border. Once you get there, you have the options of either getting a taxi or walking. I just decided to walk to see the place, so I spent about an hour walking there in order to get to the border. Once I was at the border, you have to wait for quite a while, but I actually met a Dutch guy who offered to get a taxi together to closest city, which is called Corumbá. So we ended up doing that, and we shared the taxi with some other guys too, because sharing the taxi actually worked out cheaper than getting the bus. So I spent some days in Campo Grande, the capital of Mato Grosso do Sul, and honestly I can't recommend it that much. There's not that much to see, but I do think that it's a good place to get an insight into more local Brazilian life because there's no other foreigners there. There's not really many tourist attractions. Pantanal, it's like a huge wetlands in Brazil and Bolivia where you can see wildlife. I didn't go because the tours are really expensive and I had to work anyway, so I just got an Airbnb and I worked in Campo Grande. However, even though I didn't go on my trip to the Pantanal, while we were driving, we got to see these beautiful caiman. So caiman are a species sort of similar to crocodiles. So after spending some time working in a Campo Grande, I got a 24-hour night bus to Rio de Janeiro, which actually I can recommend. It was a good price. The bus also stopped a lot, so it's really not as bad as you think. When you hear 24 hours on a bus, it kind of scares a lot of people, but it really wasn't that bad. Talking about Rio de Janeiro, it's one of the parts of this video that I've been the most excited and the most nervous to do because it's kind of a controversial city in Brazil. It's known for having the highest crime rate in all of Brazil, and I can confirm that as a foreigner, you don't always feel particularly safe there. You need to be really careful in Rio. I highly recommend it to anyone who goes to Brazil. I think it's a must-see, and I actually think that Rio is like in the top 5 of the cities that I've seen in my entire life. It really is magic. It's so beautiful. Like, the nature there is unbelievable, and the people are really amazing, like the local people from Rio, but you just need to be very careful about where you go. So the layout of Rio is sort of complicated because most of the city is built on hills and on mountains. I highly recommend doing a lot of research on favelas or communities before you travel to Brazil. These are basically areas in Brazilian cities that have a higher poverty rate, and not in all favelas because each city is different, but particularly in Rio, crime rates tend to be very high in favelas. You need to be very careful when you're walking around cities like Rio because there isn't a grid system. Everything is built on hills and mountains, so I think it's pretty easy to end up in a dangerous area without even realizing. The first time that I went to Rio, I mostly did it solo, and the second time I actually met some friends and some students there, so I can kind of speak on it from both perspectives. When I was solo, I always asked for advice from the places I stayed in, like any hostels or hotels, or you can also just search online the favela areas, mark it on a map, and when you go to the beach, so when you go to beaches like Copacabana, Ipanema, which I highly recommend going to just for the experience experience. Or Leblon is another popular one, just for the sunset and things like that. Be aware of theft. It's not really like the normal pickpocketing, it's a bit more extreme. When people go out in Rio, they don't tend to bring anything that's not necessary. If you're bringing a card, just bring that card. A lot of people also tend to bring a second phone to Rio. Local people do recommend to do it. A lot of people use an old phone when they go out. So firstly, to talk about the places that I went to see the first time I came to Rio. So I saw the sunset at Ipanema, which I highly recommend, but again, just be careful. I think that overall you can kind of avoid the center or centro. It's a good place to go sometimes if you want to party or like go for drinks, but I don't know, it's kind of a sketchy area. Even my local friends from Rio really hate it and tend to avoid it as much as possible. I also did all of the typical tourist stuff the first time I went. So I went to see the Christ, which is probably the biggest attraction in Rio because it's one of the 5 wonders of the world. It is absolutely unbelievable and I really recommend visiting, but it is so touristic and so crowded. I got the train up, but I think you also have the option to hike, which is a lot cheaper. I also got the cable car to the Sugarloaf Mountain. Again, you also have the option to hike, but I think that day I was just feeling lazy and tired. The second time when I went back to Rio, I mostly spent times with my friends and my students in areas that are a little bit less touristic. If you drive far enough down the coast out of the South Zone, the South Zone is where Copacabana, Ipanema, Leblon are, you can find these beaches that are way less crowded and way nicer, also a lot safer because it's mostly just like local residents from apartment buildings and stuff. So my friends live in Barra de Tijuca, so we spent a lot of time in that area. There's also another area called Prainha, and I highly recommend that area. Really, really beautiful. So after my time in Rio de Janeiro, I headed to Minas Gerais, which is sort of like the food capital of Brazil. I'm gonna have a whole section on food at the end of the video because I know that that's really important for a lot of people and I love Brazilian food, but if you love food, you absolutely need to travel around Minas Gerais. Minas Gerais is a huge state. I think it's about 8 times the size of Ireland geographically. So I've been to Minas Gerais twice also. The first time I went to Brazil, I went to visit a very good friend of mine and his girlfriend. Were really close, so you're going to see them a lot in this part of the video. So this was a part of the trip that I wasn't solo. I've never been to Minas solo, but honestly overall I consider it a pretty safe state, especially my friend's city, Belo Horizonte. Belo Horizonte is the capital of Minas, and I think it's a great place to go if you want to experience like good nightlife and like, you know, all the normal things that come with city life, but without the added stress of safety like you get in cities like Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. I think that this is a really good city to choose. So honestly, the last time that we went, we spent a shocking amount of time just in bars and restaurants. Mostly just had like some downtime, and then we also went to some cultural places, the main plaza. There's also the Pope's Hill where you can get a really good view of the city, and it's kind of like the landmark of Belo Horizonte. And also the first time I went to Belo Horizonte, we went to a museum.
Yeah.
If you go to Minas Gerais, I highly recommend visiting Ouro Preto. Ouro Preto is famous because, well, it's beautiful, but besides that, the history is interesting. So Minas Gerais, the name of this state in Brazil, actually means general mines. It was a pivotal state during the mining revolution in Brazil. And Ouro Preto itself actually means black gold. So a really interesting thing to do there is to actually visit the gold mines. And the city is over 300 years old, so it's just so beautiful to explore. On the way to spending a few days in Sao Paulo, we decided to drive through the countryside in Minas Gerais and go through a small city which I loved so much. It is such a hidden gem. It's called São Tomás das Letras. It's super hippie-ish, and a lot of the local people believe in aliens and a lot of other interesting creatures. I really recommend reading about the history of this city. However, given the state of the roads in São Tomás das Letras, I think my friends soon regretted offering to drive us through there.
I don't know. I have no clue. Look at this road here. Oh my gosh.
So I didn't really take a lot of videos in Sao Paulo because it was kind of like a vacation. I actually took that week off work. But honestly, Sao Paulo is a densely populated city. It's the most populated city in Brazil. I think it's something between like 16 and 20 million. It's also the economic center of Brazil, so it's really developed in comparison to some other cities. I feel like there's a lot of pros and cons to Sao Paulo, like with any city, but I feel like, it's densely populated, it's very crowded, but I also think on the other hand, it's the kind of city where you can find anything that you want to do because it's a metropolis, so any type of activity you want to find or any type of food, etc. We mostly just sort of stuck to artsy areas like this place here, Beco de Batman. I highly recommend this area, it's so nice. We also went to the typical touristic places like Paulista and also Liberdade. Liberdade, it's a suburb of Sao Paulo where there's mostly Japanese people living or people of Japanese descent, and this is because of the influx of Japanese immigrants that came to Brazil, I believe in the late 18th century looking for work after slavery was, air quotes, abolished. So because so many Japanese people moved to Brazil, Brazil is estimated to have the biggest Japanese population out of Japan, I think, around 2 million. But besides the Liberdade, I do think that there are a lot of cultural and artistic things that you can find in Sao Paulo. This is just in the capital, by the way. Like, Sao Paulo is a big state, so there's a lot of other places that you can go outside of the city, but we just stayed in the city. We went to this cat cafe, which was really nice. That was in the Liberdade area. And if you want to party, I recommend going to areas like Vila Madalena, where they had these awesome cocktails, and also areas like Augusta. Those are kind of the best areas for partying. We stayed in an Airbnb that was in Vila Saúde, and I really recommend that area. It was super safe. Normally Sao Paulo isn't the kind of place that I would like take chances or, walk around at night alone and that kind of thing, but in that suburb in Vila Saúde, I felt really safe. In terms of safety, I've heard a lot of debates from locals. There's sort of a sense of competition between cities like Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Personally, I felt a lot safer in Sao Paulo, but obviously that's just my personal feelings. I guess statistically they're roughly the same, but I think that the layout of Sao Paulo is very different to that of Rio because, as I mentioned before, Rio is mostly on mountains and on hills, and there isn't really a grid system, so it's easy to get lost in dangerous areas, whereas I feel like Sao Paulo is a little bit more organized in the sense that you can easily choose safer suburbs and keep away from more dangerous areas. But I think that the same rules in terms of being careful with your stuff go, especially on the metro, being really careful with your things, and we just didn't bring anything that was unnecessary with us, but we didn't have any problems anyway. So last but not least, I want to talk about Amazonas, which was definitely the most, I suppose, interesting or unique part of Brazil that I've visited so far. Unfortunately, the videos are really, really bad quality, like the ones from Rio, because these were filmed like 2 or 3 years ago on an old phone. In Amazonas, I went to Manaus, and then I went on a tour in the Amazon. I did this part of my trip solo, by the way. However, there's also a lot of small villages that you can visit, and I visited a few in between the tour and my time in Manaus, but unfortunately I don't have videos. So the tour that I did in the Amazon was amazing. I'm still actually looking for the name of the tour because this was years ago, but if I can't find it, then there's plenty. I recommend searching for a tour on something like Get Your Guide or Viator, but then trying to book directly with the tour company to support them more directly, and it'll also be cheaper for you. The tour in the Amazon was just like 10 out of 10. Like, absolutely recommend. Literally one of the best experiences of my entire life and my travel journeys. There was just a combination of everything. Like, we went hiking in the rainforest a lot. We also went fishing and canoeing. We swam. swam with dolphins and we saw a lot of wildlife. I tend to be kind of an adventurous person. I like the outdoors and stuff like that, but if you don't like insects or if you get freaked out, I just feel like it goes without saying this will not be enjoyable for you. Humidity in the Amazon is unbelievable. It's something that I had never experienced before in my life. I think the moment it hit me how humid it really was when I was getting a bus to wash some clothes. The bag that I was carrying the clothes in was plastic, and I looked down and the logo from the bag had stained my legs. Like there was colors all over my legs. It was so humid that the paint from the logo had literally melted onto my legs. A lot of people complain about the humidity in the Amazon. I didn't actually find the humidity too bad. The issue is more the mosquitoes and the insects. However, the tour that we went on, there's two rivers in the Amazon. So there's the Black River and then there's the Amazon River. Our tour was on the Black River and there's actually surprisingly little to no mosquitoes on the Black River. Our tour guide explained the reason for this is because the Black River is very acidic and so the mosquitoes can't lay their eggs there. Mosquitoes love you the way that they tend to love me. Go on a trip on the Black River in the Amazon rather than the Amazon River because I've heard some horror stories from other backpackers that chose to camp or hike in the Amazon River.
Okay. Okay. Not the head, the body.
اوكي بس البودي من جوا.
No.
خلينا اشلع على الراس. لا اشلع ما حاول احاول بس اشيله وخره.
No. You don't need. Okay. Okay. This is terrible.
ويا شنو هاي؟ يا هنيادي دفتني هاي.
Okay, I have scared this woman.
عادي بس لوش هو بلعها؟
لا ادري لوش بيها بعدين
لا اريد رايس انا بلعها عادي.
لوش
ما ادري لوشها يصير بلعها كان دايركت.
Just the body. Just the body. Don't need the head. That part. Just this part. Yeah. Strong. Yeah.
While the other parts of Brazil are amazing, Amazonas was just something that I had never experienced before. It was really eye-opening for me seeing how self-sustainable the people are there and the simple lives that they lead. Simple in the sense that people rely a lot more on the land, they rely a lot more on each other for help and for guidance rather than relying on materialistic things. Also, I was literally like the only tourist that I saw in Manaus. There are quite a lot of tourists in Amazonas that go on the tours and stuff like that, but Manaus is a little run down and I didn't really see many tourists outside of my hostel. One thing I will say though is that I did get a lot of harassment in Manaus. I do remember feeling kind of uncomfortable at some points, but I did definitely have some weird guys. I mean, like you do in a lot of places, but actually that's the only part of Brazil that I've ever dealt with harassment. I've definitely felt a bit unsafe in cities like Rio, you know, just because of the crime, but Amazonas is the only part of Brazil so far that I've gotten sexually harassed in. Whereas when you're in the southeast of Brazil, people are kind of a mix in terms of appearances. You have people from the South Brazil that are white and blonde like me and that have European ancestry. Then you also have people of color and you have people from indigenous descent or Asian descent, etc. Whereas when you're in the north of Brazil, I suppose you tend to stand out a little bit more, but you know, it wasn't anything too extreme and it definitely wouldn't put me off going back there because like I said, it was such an amazing experience. So that's kind of it. There's actually so much more I could say because I love Brazil and I could talk about it all day, but I don't want to bore whoever made it to the end of this. I really want to go back to Brazil in the future if I get the opportunity because like I said, it's such a big country and there's still so many parts that I want to explore. I would love to go to the northeast of Brazil and learn about maybe more about the northern cultures besides Amazonas. Definitely don't let the news put you off countries like Brazil is what I'm gonna say. I feel like countries like Brazil get a pretty bad rep because people read into the crime rates a lot, but honestly, as long as you're careful and avoid certain areas, then you'll be absolutely fine. Like Brazil has some of the most loving, caring, welcoming people I've ever met in my life, and I really think that the unique culture and the diversity is so worth the trip. Thanks for watching.
Right here, just some flour. Yeah, man. My tannin skills. I have to check other pizza.
Oh.
Otherwise, I'll pull the